All right, so good day, everyone. Here we are again for another info update. And today it's a little bit of a different one or a different kind of update. And it is going to be surrounding why, people should be careful with statements, especially those in positions of authority. So we are currently in the age where, we have social media people and we have commentators and so on who have been held accountable for reckless statements and or, inciting language. And they would have been taken to task for it. Some of them, I believe, would have been detained and so on for these statements. Now, if we go to a level higher, we also have, political bodies and political persons also issuing statements that can easily be, um, it can easily be interpreted as inciting language or, just reckless statements and so on. But first, some context. So currently, we have in the United States, as it affects all of us, the admiral that issued the command to what you'd consider in military language double tap the boat in September, the illegal drug trafficking boat for the drugs, and they struck the boat with one kinetic missile at first, and when there was apparently survivors, there was a double tap where you strike again. So what I'm gonna say missile, sorry, kinetic strike, and then they struck again. So what happens at that point is it can be considered a war crime under things like the Geneva Conventions, Article 3, Protocol 1, where it's basically the conduct during armed conflict and for those who are considered hors de combat, which simply means out of the fight. So it's like wounded soldiers or combatants, surrendering enemies, or survivors of a sinking vessel, no longer fighting or resisting. They are protected under that article. There's the Hague Conventions of the 1907, which has the principle of proportionality versus necessity. I'm just giving you some context. And then we have International Criminal Court, right? Which pretty much governs what we call the RE, or rules of engagement. If survivors are not fighting or firing, resisting, if they're wounded, trying to surrender, if they're, floating or incapacitated, any further use of lethal force could be interpreted as extrajudicial execution, which is basically murder. Now, what that simply means that in the US side of things, the admiral that issued the command could be held accountable, or the person who gave him the command, right? That is left to be seen by greater powers. However, we had a PM or PM had issued a statement. I think it was around the 3rd of September 2025. When she would have issued, I believe it was a WhatsApp statement, when I did my research, stating that, all drug traffickers, she supports the action and all drug traffickers should be killed violently. Now, as a head of government, I do not know what it is like to be a head of government, but it certainly means that one needs to be careful with their statements because you can be held liable for things that you say. There's what you call legal recklessness, because your statements can be considered as incitement to violence. It can be considered as encouragement of extrajudicial killings. It can be considered as a violation of the constitutional rights to life and legal recourse. Now, again, why these things are important and why it should be important to us is we just saw very recently where our own Minister of Homeland Security down in Trinidad and Tobago, where he claimed to be looking for avenues to have, you know, people with dual citizenship and visas have their status revoked and their visas revoked or cancelled because of social media statements and their talking points. He claims it could have been destabilizing and so on. And he's saying that, everyone, your mouth, the words that you're saying has repercussions, which I do agree with. There must be some level of repercussions for things that you say. You must be responsible for your mouth and what you are putting out there, information or misinformation. So I do agree with repercussions. What I do not agree with is what he was attempting to do. But that's a topic for another time. There have been social media persons in Trinidad and Tobago who has been held accountable, and like I said earlier, has been detained, has been charged, and so on, right here in Trinidad. So if that is the precedent that we're setting, which is that your mouth or your information or what you put out in the public space and on social media does have ramifications, it does have consequences. Again, I agree with that part. Then the same banner could also be applied to those who are in positions of power, more so. They have a greater responsibility, I would say, to their public statements and to the words that they use publicly, because they speak for a country. They speak for, an entire republic rather than just themselves or their opinion. When you are in a seat of power, your opinion is no longer your own. It is now the opinion of the greater nation you represent. So, because of things like what is happening in the US with that admiral, now it could be directly linked to, statements like that. And, it would not be a far cry to see why there could be articles where the United Nations they're saying, or people are saying that, our PM can be held liable or complicit even for statements such as that, because it can be considered reckless or inciting or, in agreement with the taking away of the legal framework for someone. So if you learned something here today, uh, I'm glad. Please give it a like, give it a share for people who don't know. And thank you for getting this far in. Peace.